All right, so today we get to talk about aggregate supply. So we already talked about aggregate demand, which is our downward sloping line on the aggregate model. And versus the regular supply and demand that we've already talked about, aggregate supply is going to be a little different because we have two different kinds of aggregate supply, the short run and the long run, which are both important in their own regard. So the aggregate supply then is the level of real GDP that firms will produce at each price level. Again, we're comparing on our aggregate model with our vertical axis being price level, our horizontal axis being real GDP or output, and it's what they're willing to produce given how much money they're gonna be able to make, pretty much. So long run versus short run then. Like I said, there's going to be two different kinds. So long run is going to be over the course of 5, 10 years, however long it is. When we're talking about this in other terms, this is our natural rate of employment. This is where, where we're operating on our PPC, whatever it might be, or it is the PPC in a sense. So it's a period of time where input prices are flexible and they adjust to changes in the price level, meaning that we're not assuming that something is going to be static the entire time. It's not going to stay the same. So for input prices then, an example is oil is an input in almost everything, right? And we're going to assume in the long run that the price of oil is going to adapt to the market, right? And it's always going to be changing. Whereas in the short run, we're only looking at a little snippet, right? We're looking at where oil is right now, something like that. In the long run then, the level of real GDP is independent of the price level, right? It's identifying that an economy can produce so much, and it can only ever produce so much. Well, kind of. It can only ever healthily produce so much for so long, and that's a big idea with it. Now, the long run then, this is where it's going to be weird for the graphs that we've been doing so far. The long run is a vertical line on our aggregate model, which we'll see here in a second. So it's a vertical line because, again, real GDP is independent of price level. It's always going to stay the same, whereas price level is going to be the thing that ends up changing. Now, the short run then is going to be, again, it's that little snippet right now where input prices are sticky and they don't adjust, right? So oil is always at the same price on this. Everything else, we're assuming it's at the price that it's at a certain period in time. That's what that word sticky means. Prices are stuck to a certain spot and they can't really change. They don't have that flexibility. And that said, then, in the short run, output or real GDP is directly related to the price level, right? And much like regular supply, it's going to be our upward sloping line, okay? Meaning that at businesses effectively are willing and capable to produce more if there's going to be a higher price level and they're going to get more return on their investment. So, long run aggregate supply has a bunch of different implications. Like I said, it marks the level of full employment. That's our natural rate of unemployment, whatever it is you want to call it. PPC, like I said, it is that line on the PPC, right? So the LRAS then, comparing this to PPC, the LRAS is the curve on the PPC, whereas our short run aggregate supply is going to be the dots, something like that. And again, this is because input prices are flexible in the long run. Prices do change over time. They very much do. Really great example from recent times. Oil, barrels of oil went into like negative prices about 6 months ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. They literally had to give oil away because no one was buying it, because no one was going anywhere. So that's a big deal, and now they've bounced back, and before that it was even higher, and back when I was your guys' age, I was paying like $4.50 a gallon. It's just how it works. Prices change over time. Now, that said, changes in price level don't affect their real profits is another idea. The idea is that if a business is producing 100 t-shirts, if one year they sell them for $10 a piece and another year they sell them for $15 a piece, it's all the same because of that idea of inflation, right? It's assuming that, inflation is, it's accounted for in a lot of ways. Not perfectly, but it is, because they're still producing the same amount. And again, this is going to be a vertical line. So here we have our long run aggregate supply with LRAS being what you call it. And then a short run. So again, in the short run, prices are sticky. This is much more a microeconomic thing to worry about specific prices and all that. And sticky is a bigger word there, but sticky is that they stay the same in the short run. It's not going to be incredibly volatile. We're just worrying about what it looks like right now or at a certain point in time. It just depends. So. The idea with the short run is that as businesses produce more, they're more willing to produce more at higher price levels because they want to make more money, right? And then vice versa, as price level is lower, there's less of an incentive to make more, and they will produce less because of that. So it's going to be upward sloping. So here we go. It's our short run aggregate supply labeled as SRAS. Now, there's going to be different things that change this. When we're talking about stuff in this course, more often than not, about 80% of the time, we're going to talk about changes in aggregate demand, but aggregate supply can shift as well. And some of the changes can look kind of similar between the two. So, much like aggregate demand, much like supply, much like long-run aggregate supply and everything else in this course, an increase will be a shift to the right and a decrease will be a shift to the left. And don't worry about this down here necessarily. So we'll just look at this before we get into some examples of what changes. So SRAS to SRAS1, that is an increase, and then SRAS to SRAS1 is a decrease there. Again, use arrows to show this when you're doing it at home or in person, obviously. It could be SRAS1 to SRAS2. That works as well. Just as long as you're differentiating between the two, that counts as proper labeling. Now, the determinants. These are going to be the things that end up changing what all of this mean. So input prices, productivity, and then legal institutional environment, which is, trust me, far easier than it sounds. So input prices. So let me get all this on the screen here and then talk about it. There we go. So domestic resource prices. First and foremost, biggest expense of 99.9% of any business is going to be wages. By far and away, it's going to be wages. People are incredibly expensive here in America. And that's a huge topic once we get to foreign exchange. And it's kind of what helps keep us, comparatively to the rest of the world, it's why we outsource so much stuff, right? It's why American companies have factories in so many other countries, because it's a lot cheaper to make it there. And if they made it here, it would mean goods would be a lot more expensive. Cost of capital, right? So in some ways, when we're talking about borrowing money to buy new machines, whatever it is, can end up affecting input prices. And then raw materials. Those are those true inputs, I guess you could say, when we're talking about making stuff. That is the oil that we were talking about, right? So as the price of oil goes up, most everything else is going to end up going up, and input price as well. And again, as you end up increasing that price, short run aggregate supply is going to shift to the left. It's going to decrease. But if oil gets cheaper, then short run aggregate supply is going to go to the right. It's going to increase. Foreign resource prices. As our dollar's stronger, there'll be lower foreign resource prices comparatively, and it makes it easier for us to buy stuff. Again, the US dollar is super strong. It's, if not the strongest in the world. So it makes it pretty easy to buy resources from other companies. I'm pretty sure I've said it before, but America has pretty much some of the most oil in the world right underneath our feet. But we like to buy it from other countries because we can get it cheaper that way. Even if we make our own here, we still have to pay for all the people and stuff like that, and it ends up being more expensive. And then as your dollar's weaker, you have higher foreign resource prices because your dollar can't really compete with them, and it makes it harder to buy stuff. So it's a big deal. Market power, will not worry too much about this. It kind of branches off more into microeconomics with monopolies and cartels and stuff like that. But the basic idea is that there are certain companies that can control a product. In America, there are arguments for certain companies being monopolies, but none have been officially determined to beat them just yet, so we'll not worry about that. And then again, as resource prices go up, short run aggregate supply goes down, going to the left, and then as prices go down, short run aggregate supply increases, and it goes to the right. Productivity then. So productivity. That's pretty much how efficiently people are working. One of the big things with productivity, give you a second to think, like what is something that could increase productivity? Just a generalization. There's two big things. First is technology. Technology by far and away can end up increasing productivity, almost by more than anything else. So when we're talking about tractors, right? One tractor can do the work of 100 people when we're talking about planting things and harvesting them. It can. So it increases productivity 100-fold. It does. They're incredibly productive compared to one individual person. The other half of it then is going to be education or human capital, right? It's what people know. It's the skills that people have. And it being another important part of this, it's why here in America especially that labor costs are so high compared to everything else, because of what we know, how educated and how prepared we are. Because you can have that tractor all you want, but at the end of the day, you need someone to drive that tractor. And things of that nature as well. So as you get more training, you get better at your job, you can more efficiently do it, more efficiently make stuff, more effectively use that technology. It just depends on how you want to look at it. So as you have more productivity, meaning you have better technology or better education, your short run aggregate supply is going to shift to the right. And especially with technology and education, that has long run implications as well. And then lower productivity means you have a higher unit production cost. You're going to have a shift to the left of short run aggregate supply. Now, productivity is a difficult one to find a shift to the left on, because in a lot of ways it means that you need to go back to the Stone Age overnight, or your people need to get stupider overnight. But it could happen, right? It could. I just can't think of any examples. And then the legal institutional environment. So that comes down to taxes and subsidies. Oof. So taxes and subsidies. So taxes on business will shift a short run aggregate supply to the left. What it means is there's less incentive for businesses to produce stuff, and because of that they do. It effectively makes their operating costs higher. A lot of times too, what can happen, they won't necessarily stop production, they'll just increase their prices. It just depends on the approach that they want to take. So taxes, as you know, that's money that is taken away as cost of doing business by the government. Subsidies, on the other hand, will reduce the unit production cost, shifting short run aggregate supply to the right. Subsidies then are the opposite of taxes. They are money that is given to businesses to aid in their production. There's tons and tons and tons of examples of this, especially in America and American history. If you had me for U.S. history, something I always talk about once we get to the Great Depression is that America is so good at growing corn. If we actually grew corn as well as we could, corn would be free. They'd have to pay to give corn away. In order to stop that from happening, what the government does then is they give the corn industry pretty heavy subsidies, meaning they give them money not to grow corn. All right, it happens. Another big thing is the meat industry. All right, it's kind of the opposite in a way, is that meat is very expensive. And we're kind of seeing this in the past couple months where meat prices have gone up a whole bunch. Meat, if they just sold it for what it was worth, it'd be very, very expensive. So the meat industry ends up getting very heavy subsidies to help reduce the prices of meat. And it's a big thing. So it's subsidies again, it's money that the government gives to businesses to help them out, and in turn, a lot of times helping us out as well. Government regulation then, so this is going to be different kinds of policies that businesses have to follow. So more government regulation creates a cost of compliance. So for example, a really good example is say we want businesses to be more environmentally friendly, all right? And now every business, it's a legal requirement for that business to recycle everything they possibly can. There are costs associated with that, right? First part is you need to train your workers on how to effectively recycle, sort bins, whatever it is, needs to happen. They need proper facilities for it, right? So they now need to purchase and maintain a bunch of different recycling bins and pickups and whatever else it might be. And then factor in the time that it takes out of their employees' day to effectively manage that, right? So it can happen. Another thing is that less regulation reduces costs and shorten aggregate supply shifts to the right. So especially with American history last year, a really great example of this is going to be the Gilded Age. There was, I mean, when we're looking at American history, it's the best example of pure, unrestrained, free market type capitalism, right? Businesses can effectively do whatever they want. Workers end up working 14-hour days for the modern day equivalent of like $35. And that's really bad. It is. So government regulation definitely isn't always a bad thing. It can be, but it isn't always. But it could end up meaning that you have a better supply because of it. It ends up depending. So that's it for aggregate supply, short run and long run. Make sure you're getting 4, 3, 2, 1 done, and please let me know if you have any questions. That is all for today.